Hello and welcome to another episode of Murder with Friends, the show where two friends get together and talk about the darker sides of history. I'm your host, Grace Baldridge, and joining me today is an improbable and yet a lovable guest, my friend, Neff. Will, welcome to Murder with Friends.
So wonderful to be here.
So real quick, we could get into the details of it, but we used to live together.
Yes.
And then we didn't, and we were friends, and then we weren't, and now we're friends again.
Yes.
And there's a larger story about reconciliation and the resilience of friendship, but basically, we're here.
That's right.
We made it.
Yes.
And where might...
That's the most loaded intro. I took Grace's gold star, actually. That, if you're wondering, yes, we had a sexual relationship. Sexual and violent. No. We are friends.
Yeah. So how might our viewers recognize you? Because you are on a couple things that are not just this show.
Yes, your viewers might recognize me from when I wear women's underpants on BuzzFeed from time to time, or Full Screen, if you are familiar with the Full Screen programming and app.
Right, and today we're gonna be talking about Jack Unterweger, who was a serial killer that I learned about from you years ago.
Yep.
And I wanna know how you heard about this guy.
Okay, so here's how I came to learn about Jack Unterweger. I was a film major in college, and part of that is you get to take, very silly electives. And so I saw criminal psych as one of these electives that I could take in school. And I had always kind of had this very morbid fascination with serial killers, so I was like, let's do it, let's go. So I sign up, and we are going through this criminal psych course, and we get to the serial killer portion of the class, and I start perking up big time. And especially they get to this part where from this one documentary series called Most Evil, they have an evil scale 1 to 23. They rate all the violent murderers of all time on like worst to like, oh, I killed this guy in self-defense 3 times in a row or something like that. And so when this came up, I was like, tell me about the 23s, tell me about the worst people. And my teacher kind of realized how like overly enthusiastic I was. So he came up to me after class and he's like, hey, so you dig serial killers, huh? I was like, yeah. He's like, okay, you gotta check out this guy, Jack Unterweger. And I was like, oh yeah, what about him? He's like, he's the best. And I was like, really? And he's like, go check him out. So I checked him out, and he was just, I was reading and I was like, no way. And I came back and I was like, unreal. And he's like, I know. And we kind of like nerded out over being serial killer fans, which is kind of a strange thing to be a fan of.
You're in good company on this show.
Right, and so then after that conversation, my professor and I were boys, but I kind of always remember this serial killer as being like almost a vignette of like how to serial kill, like the style.
What we think of.
Right, like what gives us nightmares. This guy he hits all the big marks. Like he's pretty dope.
So with that teaser in mind, let's go to our first clip that will give you an idea about who we're gonna be discussing on today's show.
He was a celebrated author and cold-blooded killer.
How could a guy who had such a winning, seductive ability at the same time be so inhuman?
He was extremely sadistic.
A convicted murderer set free, only to kill again.
Jack had not been redeemed at all. Jack was still this psychopathic killer.
In the end, what mattered to him was just to control people and kill them.
So let's dive in a little bit into this guy's childhood. Jack is born August 16th, 1950, and he is raised fatherless by a woman who is at odds with the law. Some reports have said that she was a prostitute. And most of his time was actually spent with his grandfather, who he says was an alcoholic, who introduced him to alcohol and schnapps at a very early age. And early on, he's exploring sexually deviant and violent urges.
Right, and introduced is a very kind way of saying that. By Jack's own account, he said that his grandfather used to make him hold a bottle of schnapps and just chug it till he was crying and shaking.
Oh my God.
Like this was like a violent introduction to binge drinking and to being an adult, as his grandfather saw, and making him a man very young, very violent, very abusive.
And also early on, he's aware of what prostitution is, and he becomes a pimp at an early age.
Right.
All of this happens, when he's a teenager in his formative years. So it begs the question: nature versus nurture. Where do you stand with this guy?
I think this is a perfect storm. I think this is a little bit of column A. I think this is a little bit of column B. I think this is a person probably born with some sociopathic tendencies, maybe some kind of mental deficiency as far as his ability to empathize with other living things. This is probably a guy that was abusing, kittens and bullshit when he was a young kid. But then on top of that, you have this legacy of abuse. You have him introduced to women kind of at a almost inhuman place in society.
Well, women are introduced to him in the sexually objective form.
Right.
He doesn't,
Exactly.
his own mother
Exactly.
is objectified by men, and that's her form of income. It's very normalized.
And that's compounded by the fact that she kind of abandons him, right? Like she doesn't really like this kid. She doesn't really care for this kid. And he grows up uneducated, unloved, and abused. And I think when you combine that with a sociopathic person, a person by nature, there's your violent killer right there.
Right.
A guy who by nature has no empathy and has a history of abuse and violence, and you pair those together, you got yourself a violent
So
killer.
this perfect storm reaches its climax in 1974 because he is convicted, arrested, all that stuff.
Of murder.
Of murder.
Of murder.
He kills an 18-year-old girl, Margaret Schaefer, and I'm gonna toss to a clip right now outlining what was leading up to his very first kill.
Yes.
He was accused of rape, abducting a minor, and assault with a steel rod. Then, in the winter of 1974, Unterweger's criminal activities took an even darker turn when he met 18-year-old Margaret Schaefer. Margaret was a friend of Jack Unterweger's girlfriend at the time. As was usually the case, Jack was broke and looking for an easy mark.
Jack and his German girlfriend arrive in this town where she is from, and they see her school friend, Margaret, walking down the sidewalk. And Jack suggests that she get into the car. Margaret gets into the car, and Jack, it seems very impulsively, decides, well, we'll rob her and we'll rob her parents' house.
But that's not what ends up happening. Not only does he rob her, he then kills her.
Yes.
Strangling her with, what does he use, Will?
The bra strap, I believe, in this murder. Right, and the coolest thing about this guy is just like your movie serial killers, he has like a nom de plume, a weapon of choice, which is a very unique slip knot that he ties in the underpants or the bra of his victim and slides it down their neck, crushing the trachea and strangling these women. So I mean, this is like your Michael Myers butcher knife. This is like your, Leatherface chainsaw. This is a guy, like a boogeyman who has a very real weapon of choice.
And this is his first time executing on that. It seems very impulsive. His girlfriend was in the car the whole time.
Yes.
He is sentenced in 1976. His girlfriend's testimony was instrumental in getting him behind bars.
Oh yeah.
And he is sent to prison.
Big time.
He's sent to prison
For life.
For life.
Life sentence.
But what does he do behind bars? Is he acting up? Like, is he?
No, he is a ideal prisoner. He gets put in this Austrian rehabilitation program and immediately immerses himself in learning to read and to write at a professional level.
Because he was basically illiterate at the time when he was sentenced.
Right. And so he begins publishing his own works. He starts writing children's stories. And because of his model behavior and his progress writing children's stories and his own autobiography.
His autobiography, just to cut you off really quickly, is called Purgatory or The Trip to Jail, Report of a Guilty Man.
Yes.
And it becomes a bestseller, captivates the nation.
In Austria. And so I guess the penal board looks at this guy and they go, this is a poster child for Austrian rehabilitation. Like if we need evidence that what we're doing in our penal system is working, Jack Unterweger is gonna be our poster boy.
And they do end up releasing him in 1990, but
after 15 years, the absolute minimum for that type of crime.
And what would eventually kick off the crimes that would make him a serial killer. And when we come back in part 2, we're gonna tell you all about how Jack Unterweger became the killer that we know today.